The sly grin on his pale face shone in the moonlight. The man held out a thumb to the side of the road, a thumb that seemed unnaturally long and pointed. His skin looked as white as a sheet of paper, and his grin spread from ear to ear. His eyes watched me passing, like two dark oil spots shining under the streetlight. I did not pull over. I didn't even talk to the man. But it would happen again. Everything had gone strange. That day, back in 2019, had seemed normal enough. I'd gone to work, doing a night shift at the warehouse. They paid me decent, $24 an hour, so commuting 30 minutes each day didn't bother me. I certainly had no higher-paying warehouse job in my town, a town where huge stretches of forest took over most of the land. At 2:25 a.m., I left work, driving home the same country road I'd used 1,000 times before. It was a straight shot to my town, a winding paved road that passed by countless corn and tobacco fields, the smell of manure permeating the air and wafting in through the vents. I'd burned the air freshener slightly, as always I did, releasing a nice vanilla smell inside the car that sent the reeking odor of old fertilizer away. But by 2:50 a.m., I realized something seemed off. First off, I should have reached my home by now. But the road just kept going forward, totally dark, the field stretching off to the horizon in every direction. Eventually, I realized I was going in a circle. I saw the same massive dead tree on the right, its bare branches reaching up into the cloudless sky. I considered turning around and trying to go back the way I had came, but I knew I had to be on the right road, so I kept going forward, and after a few minutes, I saw the hitchhiker for the first time. His skin looked totally white and bloodless, thin and papery, as it stretched across his strangely inhuman face. His grin seemed to stretch from ear to ear, and I saw his long, twisted thumb extend when I passed. Like hell I'm picking him up, I said, turning on the radio. But I checked the rearview mirror a few times, my heart seeming to beat too fast in my chest when I saw him staring in my direction, still smiling broadly. His limbs were thin and twisted, too long, the joints bending in ways and areas that human limbs shouldn't normally go. He wore a plain khaki shirt and khaki pants. I didn't realize at the time, but that was the uniform for jails and prisons in the area, at least the low-security inmates who didn't require bright red or orange jumpsuits of potential escapees or those suspected of convicting extreme crimes. Streetlights flickered as I looked back, strobing quickly, casting the silhouette of the man in an eerie light. With every strobe, I saw his face transform, the smile fading into a scowl of pure hatred and insanity. I drove faster, trying to get away. 5 minutes later, I saw him again in front of my car. The road went straight, but somehow he had gotten ahead of me. The lights flickered faster all around the road, and his smile had returned, though looking even more menacing than before. His teeth looked too sharp, and there seemed to be far too many of them in that inhumanly wide mouth. As I drove past him, my heart hammered in my chest, the whole world going dark, and I slammed on the brakes. The lights on my car had just cut out, as well as the street lights, and the ambient light from the stars and the moon were non-existent under the thick black clouds covering the sky to the horizon. I heard light footsteps against the pavement of the road. My engine still ran, but even inside the car, the lights had gone out. The radio turned off and the gauges stopped working. Something felt wrong, not just in a mechanical sense. There was a feeling of dread. As the streetlights and the gauges and the radio all came back on at the same moment, I saw the man in my passenger seat, that eerie grin still spread across his face. The The door had never opened or shut as far as I knew. It seemed like he had just teleported into my car from his position near the passenger door. Perhaps that was simply a trick of my mind in the darkness. Perhaps. "Thanks for helping me," he said in a low, mocking tone. "You don't know how many people just drive past and refuse to help their fellow human beings in a time of trouble." "What do you want?" I asked, low, whispering the words. Wished I had a knife or a can of mace or something that would give me the edge. I felt so naked. "I just need a ride to the next exit, friend." There isn't a highway. There are no exits. It's just a random country road. I'm not even sure I know where I am. I don't know how that's possible, seeing as I take this way home every day, but there's an exit when you need them in life, and I need one now. Go forward. When you see the exit to Rusty Township, take it. I'll let you go if you do. I'll let you live. But otherwise..." He turned to me, grinning again, looking at his sly, inhuman face, hearing his words. A fragment of an old poem by Robert Browning I'd first heard in college came to me. My first thought was, he lied in every word, that hoary cripple with malicious eyes, askance to watch the workings of his own lie, on mind and mouth scarce able to find a ford. Suppression of the glee that pursed and scoured its edges at one more victim gained thereby. What else should he be set for with his staff? What, save to waylay with his lies and snare all travelers who might find him posted there, and ask the road? I guessed that skull-like laugh would break what crutch gin write my epitaph for past time in the dusty thoroughfare. Looking into those eyes, I felt that this poem had been written about this exact man. I drove forward, and he reached into his pocket. I tensed, expecting a gun or a knife, but he brought out a little pouch instead. "What's that?" I asked nervously, looking over. To my surprise, an exit sign had showed up a few hundred feet away. The pale man threw the pouch from hand to hand, his twisted, inhumanly long fingers snatching it out of the air, like a toad snatching a fly. "Just a few precious things I like to keep on me. Where we're going, we'll need these. By the way, what's your name? If we're going to be traveling companions, we should introduce ourselves. That is, after all, the basic custom in our worlds." Up ahead, I could make out the sign now. The Rusty Township, 5 miles. Good old Rusty. It's a spectacular place. You'll never see anything like it, I guarantee. By the way, my name's Forrest. I'm quite a big deal where I come from. You'll be happy you stopped to help me. I guarantee that. He laughed, a shrill, gurgling laugh that made my blood run cold. "Isn't that right, Jason?" I nodded. I wasn't surprised in the least that he knew my name. Clearly, he'd been waiting for me, and me alone. I didn't know why, but I had a feeling I'd find out soon. I turned on my blinker as we approached the exit, even though I hadn't seen another car or human being on the road in over an hour. The woods rapidly receded into broken, bombed-out houses and buildings. The darkness around us jumped and danced as headlights illuminated rusting tanks with the tops blown off, burnt cars whose blackened skeletons stood on the sides of the road like sentries, their smashed and shattered safety glass scattered across the roads. "What is this place?" I asked, horrified. "Just keep driving," the man said. At certain points, the road narrowed so much from the wreckage that I had to slow down to a few miles an hour, trying to weave in and out of the cataclysmic damage that had destroyed the city. Off in the distance, I saw the silhouettes of skyscrapers, black against the dark gray clouded sky. No light shone in the buildings. Bodies hung from the dead, listless lampposts as we neared the downtown. Soon the entire main street turned into a pile of wreckage, and my car would go no further. The remains of what looked like a fighter jet shone under the headlights, pieces scattered and twisted and blackened from the flames across every part of the road. The corpse of the plane mixed with the various burnt-out cars and destroyed tanks to create a nearly impregnable barricade, unless one was on foot and could climb over the wreckage. Forrest pointed to a side street, grinning. I swung the car left, and the lights illuminated a horror I had never imagined. The first living being I had seen in this apocalyptic wasteland. I thought it was a little boy at first, but it seemed I was wrong. His skin shone a bright red, like the color of inflammation, and he spider-walked on all fours backward, his head upside down, his hands twisted in front of him as he bent and heaved. I had never seen anything like it, except maybe in the movie The Exorcist, and the speed with which he went forward in that twisted posture sent waves of dread running through my body. His eyes focused on the headlights of the car, and he hissed so loudly that I could hear it through the closed windows. He moved forward, twisting and writhing, his joints seeming to bend in ways that human limbs were not supposed to. His head so hyperextended, it looked like his neck should have snapped. But it was the eyes reflecting the light of the headlights that really disturbed me. They looked to be covered in a bloody film, a thick pink membrane that dribbled strange fluid down his face. Underneath the cataract, I could almost see the vague suggestion of actual eyes, but it was like staring down a well, unable to make out the bottom, except by silhouette or glimpses. Jumping up on all fours, he flew through the air and landed fast on my windshield. I began to scream. "Forrest, do something!" I yelled, but his bloodless, inhuman face seemed nonplussed. I saw, in photographic awareness of a massive adrenaline spike, he still had his little pouch in hand. Sighing, he opened it up, untying the drawstring. I heard little clicking sounds coming from inside. Looking back, I saw the boy's face almost pressed against the windshield, staring directly at me. His eyes were only a foot away through that thin glass, regarding me with abject hatred and hunger. He gnashed his teeth, snapped his jaws open and closed. Then I saw his little red hand lift up, and he started smashing the windshield. With no apparent pain, his fist collided with the glass in front of my face. A circular dent appeared, the loud thud making me jump so high I nearly hit my head. Cracks spiderwebbed out. He raised his hand again, punching hard, furious, spitting and hissing. Coming back down, I heard the windshield give way when he hit the exact same spot again. As if in slow motion, I saw the web of cracks lengthening and thickening when the safety glass shattered, sending the debris falling over me and Forrest in the inside of the car. Forrest was no longer smiling. His scowl made him look demented. The pouch had opened, and from it he drew a pebble no larger than a pencil eraser. The pebble seemed to radiate color and light, almost like opal, but the light in his stone seemed to come from within it. The rainbows of color shimmered within the stone, constantly swirling and combining. The boy began to reach into the car, and I started shrieking. His fingers looked broken and twisted, and I saw his nails had turned black with crusted blood and dirt shoved beneath them. The smell of his body from so close made me want to gag. The odor felt like a physical presence inside the car. A thick, rotting, cheesy smell that emanated from the boy's strange flesh. Forrest grabbed the hand just as it neared my throat. The bleached hand snatched at it in a blur, moving faster than humanly possible. With a terrifying crack, I heard the bones snap as he twisted the hand backwards until it nearly touched the boy's arm. The bones splintered and snapped through the skin, sending drops of dark crimson blood flying in every direction. After a moment of utter silence, the boy let out a wail that shook the car. It covered my ears as the rest of the glass in my car shattered under the deafening cacophony. "God, shut up!" I tried to scream to Forrest, but I couldn't even hear my own words. If it went on much longer, I felt certain my eardrums would explode. I clamped down tightly around my ears, but at that moment, Forrest pulled the boy by his broken arm towards him and raised the colorful stone to the boy's face. With his other hand, he grabbed the boy's throat and choked, closing off his windpipe. My ears rang in sudden silence. "My boy, my boy," Forrest said in a fatherly tone. "This is the wrong car for you to attack." He squeezed tighter, and the boy's already crimson face went an even darker blue. He tried to claw and bite at Forrest, but the boy rapidly lost strength. As he died, Forrest raised the strange iridescent pebble to the boy's mouth. I saw something go from the boy into the pebble, and I'm not sure what it was. It looked like streaming shadows, totally black and impenetrable. It ran in a current, the black torrent swirling and twisting as the pebble absorbed all of it. The boy seemed to lose substance, his skin sucking in on his body, his flesh evaporating before my eyes. By the end, he looked just as desiccated as everything else, his skeleton dry, papery thin. Forrest threw him outward, the light body arcing through the air and falling on top of a blackened motorcycle, laying on its side in the middle of the street. I looked over and saw with both wonder and horror that the pebble had changed. Its formerly opalescent quality had gone, and now torrents of black and dark crimson swam inside the stone, still twisting and moving constantly, but without the beautiful iridescent light it had shone with earlier. What is this place?" I asked, the only thing I could think of. I didn't expect Forrest to answer me, not truthfully. I knew he would probably kill me as soon as he got whatever it was he was after. But he surprised me, told me a story that I would later confirm to be true. "I told you, this is Rusty Township in the county of Victoriat. It's a rather long story, I'm sorry to say. I don't have time to tell it all to you today. I can give you, what do you call it in your world, the Cliff Notes version." "Okay," I said, uncertainly. He looked back at the pebble, still in his hand, and with a dexterous flip of his fingers he threw it in the air and watched it land perfectly in the little pouch's mouth. He tied the knot and put it back in his pocket, turning to me and grinning. "It's a rather funny story. I mean, at least to me. Few billion dead and the rest refugees in a dying, unrecognizable world." He did laugh at that. "I guess it all started with a man named General Matheson. He took power in Victoriat in a coup from the democratically elected government during a period of hyperinflation and crippling unemployment, when the people rioted and the homeless covered the streets. The citizens of Victoriat supported him, by and large, because the conditions seemed so terrible that they thought it couldn't possibly get any worse. Ironic, in a way, isn't it? So, General Matheson starts fixing the economy by starting wars. A wartime economy requires countless tanks, soldiers, planes, missiles, everything else, which makes new jobs. He bombarded the Kingdom of China, stating that they had taken legitimate islands in South China Sea from Victoriat's allies in the region. Meanwhile, back at home, he also began recruiting men for the running of camps and the rounding up and murdering of undesirables. He began with drug addicts and alcoholics, homeless people, the insane, criminals, and whoever else seemed unfit for his great new country. The men called themselves the Iron Servants. They began to drag people off the streets and take them away, never to be seen again. In reality, the iron servants would put them in a cell or transport bus and give them all the water to drink, water laced with high doses of carfentanil and atropine, which are both tasteless and extremely lethal. Afterwards, they'd just burn the bodies in open-air pits. By this method, they killed tens of millions, and the economy was absolutely roaring. Everyone was happy, everyone had jobs, and all the problems seemed to have disappeared overnight. A true success, wouldn't you say? A happy ending. Well, not exactly, though. Turned out the Kingdom of China had developed a strange new bomb. Not a nuclear one, but one that used antimatter as the explosive material. It had a far stronger yield than any hydrogen bomb, or so they predicted. But antimatter was so expensive and hard to produce that they had no trial run. They took the first bomb and dropped it over Victoria's Center, near the city of Rusty Township, where we are now. The antimatter ignited when it hit the surface and was released from its containment. There was quite an explosion, a massive crater that went deep into the ground. A black mushroom cloud went high into the clouds, and the ground shook, but when the smoke had cleared, it seemed the antimatter hadn't had nearly as much yield as projected. Most of the city still stood. But that crater had strange things within it, as the people soon found out. Very strange things, indeed. They began to crawl and swarm out of the hole as if a tunnel to another world had been opened. And perhaps it had. There's no perhaps about it, I thought to myself, as I put the destroyed car in drive and went forward into the dead city. Desperate, I watched Forrest out of the corner of my eye. He seemed to watch me in return, though his eyes constantly flicked back to the road. I saw the headlights reflecting off strange eyes in the alleyways of the buildings, but whenever I turned to look, only the shadows remained. I had my seatbelt on, but Forrest didn't. He must have felt confident in his abilities and unconcerned with a car crash. I knew he had power and quickly formulated a suicide plan. I accelerated the car. Ahead of us, I saw a light pole with a long, dead, desiccated corpse hanging from the fraying noose. I tried to line up the passenger side of the car directly with the metal pole. Holding my breath, I closed my eyes as the car closed the last few feet, still accelerating, the engine roaring. I couldn't have been going more than about 40 miles an hour, but it sent Forrest flying through the shattered windshield. The driver's side airbag deployed, smashing me in the face so hard I saw stars. I felt blood gushing from my nose, and the world seemed to go dark for a few seconds. The engine hissed, spitting coolant and transmission fluid in great steaming gouts that puddled under the car. After regaining my senses, I looked up to see Forrest. He lay on the hood of the car, moaning and moving his hands in random circles. Blood streamed from a deep gash on his skull and covered his inhuman face. He wasn't smiling anymore. Stumbling, my fingers trembling, I undid the seatbelt and opened the driver's door, falling on the cracked pavement below. I breathed hard, then, with a sudden burst of will, I pushed myself up. Forrest was still grunting incoherently, apparently unaware of where he was. I heard him repeating the same nonsense over and over again. He said, clenching and unclenching his twisted fingers. I thought of just choking him then and there, while he was seemingly weak and defenseless. But I didn't know how defenseless he actually was, even in his weakened state. Moreover, I had no idea how to get back to my world, and killing the only being who I felt sure knew the way might backfire spectacularly, dooming me here for the rest of my life. I decided to book it as fast as I could and leave him there, bleeding on the crumbling front of my car. I started walking fast, stumbling slightly as pain rang out in my legs. When I felt I had mostly regained my balance after the crash, I started jogging. Looking back towards the car, I saw him getting up, trying to push himself off the hood of the car with his long, strange fingers. He fell back down on the hood, then reached down with a shaking hand and took something out of his bound leather satchel, placing it in his mouth. I took a left into the first alley I found. The whole city was a horror show, a deluge of nightmares. Rotting corpses lay everywhere, and I saw a dumpster at the end of the alleyway filled to the brim with body parts. Decomposing legs, arms, chests, and hands, all sliced off before being thrown into the dumpster haphazardly, like common refuse. One hand limply reached out, as if trying to motion for help. It had blackened fingernails, and the thumb was missing. The body parts overflowed the dumpster, a cloud of bugs buzzing around it. The smell as I got near was overwhelming. I gagged, moving to the side of the alley, trying to put as much distance between myself and that dumpster as humanly possible. It was an odd, rotting tomato mixed with feces and rancid meat odor. But before I left that city, I would see and smell much worse than that. I took random turns, left and right through the streets and the alleyways, trying to put as much distance between myself and Forrest as possible. Paranoid, I kept hearing imaginary footsteps, but it was always just the echoes of my own. In one alleyway, I saw what looked like a mutated raccoon standing at the far end. It was the size of a German shepherd, with huge tumors and fibrous growths all over its body. I saw a fifth paw hanging from underneath its stomach, boneless and stunted. It gnawed on the corpse of an old woman that had long since desiccated, chewing open her bones and trying to suck out the marrow with its twisted, stained teeth. The raccoon didn't notice me, or the strange silhouette slowly sneaking up behind it. As soon as I saw movement, I quickly looked around and saw a stainless steel garbage can with dark, thick fluid that dripped from the exterior. When I hurriedly peered down, part of me expected to see Forrest's inhuman grinning face in there. But what I found was nearly as horrible. I saw the garbage can was filled with rotting dogs and cats, piled one on top of another like cordwood. For a moment I was so horrified that I almost forgot what I was doing. Then my brain screamed at me to move, to hide, and I lunged to the side, hoping the man on the far end of the alley hadn't seen me. I held my breath, trying not to inhale the overwhelmingly rancid stench that radiated from the can. Decomposing animal flesh smells different from rotting human corpses, as anyone with experience in both can attest. Rotting corpses always had more of a rotten tomato smell with a hint of sewage, compared with the musky odor that mixed in with the putrefied meat smell of dead animals. Both were absolutely horrible, some of the worst smells I had ever experienced. At first I thought it was some sort of deformed monster with irregular growths and fibrous tissue standing out all over its body. Then I saw it was just a man, some sort of mutant or victim of a genetic disorder or radiation, maybe something even worse. He had a bat with nails sticking out of it, and before the mutated raccoon could turn its head, he had whipped the far end of the bat into the top of its skull. The raccoon crumbled to the ground with a soft exhalation of air. My first instinct was to run, but something in the man's demeanor made me think he wasn't the monster I first believed. He walked in a childish way and talked to himself. I could hear the sad words he muttered in a low voice, echoing off the brick walls of the alley. "More raccoon. I'm so sick of eating raccoon alone every night. I wish I could find some more jerky. Remember when we found the big stash of jerky in the bunker? I shouldn't have eaten it all. So dumb. Dumb, Frank. Never thinking about the future." He whacked himself hard on the side of his deformed head. "Hello?" I called out, overriding my better judgment. I had few options, trapped in this strange, dead city in another world. The man who had just started dragging the raccoon corpse away by the scruff of the neck immediately froze, his face a comical mask of confusion. He didn't seem scared at all, but now he noticed me for the first time as I stepped out from behind the garbage can. "What's a normie like you doing in the city?" he asked. I saw one eye had a slanting look, like a fold of skin had partially grown over the lid. The other widened comically in surprise as he saw my clothes. "You look like ones who came through from the stairway. Never turned out good, I tell you. They don't know what they're doing, coming down those stairs." He dropped the raccoon body and quickly strode over to me, moving much faster than his size would suggest. He put out his huge, scarred hand. I stared at it for a moment, confused, then reached out and shook it. I felt his iron grip crush my bones and tried not to wince. I looked at him closer and realized he looked similar to the Elephant Man, except far more solidly built and mobile. He had the same strange growths emerging from his face and body, however. They didn't hide the bulging muscles underneath, though. "I'm Frankie," he said, smiling, showing his few remaining teeth. "Used to live here with my family." He motioned to the destroyed ruins of the city around him. "But after the bombs, my mama, she disappeared. I miss her. I keep looking, hoping I'll see her again, but I don't think she's here anymore. I think I'm all alone now." He looked like he was about to cry, and I had no idea what to say. "I'm Jason. Sorry about your mother, Frankie. Do you know your way around this place?" His sad expression evaporated, and he smiled again. The corners of his mouth formed a partial smile, which seemed as far as they could manage. Made me feel sad to watch him. He had a sense of innocence and friendliness that contrasted heavily with the hellish conditions surrounding him. He seemed like he was mentally somewhat slow, but he also had a sense of confidence in his ability to survive in this apocalyptic wasteland, which I admired. "Course, didn't I say I grew up here? There's a building near here. It's real strange, though. Changes often. The passageways move around. The doors switch places. It leads down, very deep. I don't go down to the bottom. It's filled with horrible things." I was about to respond when I heard a strange humming noise. It sounded ethereal, almost like a gong or a singing bowl. Yet the sound also seemed to get into my bones and made my eyes water. Even now, a few years later, my eyes water just thinking about it. It was one of the most jarring and horrendous sounds I'd ever heard. Frankie's eyes widened in horror. He dropped the raccoon and grabbed me by the arm. He ran towards the street. Soon as we came out on the street, my breath caught in my throat. One of the largest buildings I'd ever seen stood there, the color of polished silver. I saw windows spiraling around the exterior of it, like the stairs of a lighthouse. Looking up, I couldn't even see the top of it. It seemed to simply fade into the dirty gray clouds above my head. "No time to look now," Frankie whispered, a tone of urgency in his voice. "Come on." He pulled me forward and over to the huge building, across 12 lanes of cracked concrete and rubble. He ran into the shattered glass door of the massive skyscraper. I heard shards of glass and rusted nails crackling under my steel-toed shoes, and I was glad I'd come from work and hadn't been wearing sandals. That humming seemed more insistent, higher-pitched, and closer. I turned to look quickly and saw Forrest coming out of the alley, a look of fury and hatred twisting his bleached white face. His eyes blazed and he kept snapping his head to the left and right, almost certainly looking for me. As he got closer, the humming grew louder, and I saw him holding the same pebble he had held to the demonic boy's face as he died. Though tiny, gave off a strange black light that threw twisting shadows over the rubble and ruined building outside. I realized with horror that he was using it as some sort of tracking device to find me, and very likely kill me. He still had dried blood staining his face, and I saw fresh drops running down his scalp. He ignored them and, like a bloodhound berserker with the scent of his prey, moved towards me. "You need to hide," Frankie said urgently as he pointed at the corner of the lobby. I saw a hatchway sitting open. The bunker! Let's go! Without any more urging, I sprinted towards it. Frankie went down first, and I followed. As I poked my head out and reached up to grab the hatch, I saw Forrest only feet down the shattered glass door of the skyscraper. As quickly as possible, I lowered the hatch, pulling out my phone to shine some light and turned the steel wheel to lock it inside. I used the light to catch up with Frankie, who seemed to know the tunnels so well that he could navigate them in the dark. He turned his deformed face towards me, smiling and excited, childish glee evident from his expression. "He won't be getting through that. That's a bomb door. It was built for the big ones, the H-bomb and the antimatter one." "What is this place?" I asked. "They call it Sanctuary. There's an entire underground town in here. There's where General Matheson used to run his government from. It goes up 2 stories. How do they build so big?" I shook my head. I don't know. "So do people live down here?" He frowned at the question, thinking for a long moment. Then his eyes widened. "People? No people." "Okay, no people. So what does that mean?" "Well, other things do like to live down here. It's a big place, you know. Even I haven't explored most of it, but sometimes the pigmen get in here, and the snakes. I usually run when the snakes get in here," he said with a shudder. "What kind of snakes?" I asked. Like rattlesnakes?" His expression stayed stoic for a long moment as he considered the question. Then he began to laugh, a sound like a child amused by a dirty joke. "You mean those little ones with the rattles on their tails in the desert? No. I mean snakes. Usually about my height, and as long as..." He pointed down the end of the tunnel, a few 100 feet away, and I groaned. "Some people also think General Matheson lives under Sanctuary, but the tunnel's further down for hundreds of length, you know." I didn't know what a length was, but when he explained it in his slow, plodding way, I figured out it meant about half a mile. So I guessed, anyway. "Why would General Matheson live down here?" I said, genuinely curious. The story Forrest had told me had intrigued me. It reminded me of certain events that had occurred on Earth, my Earth, though nothing nearly as catastrophic as this. "He disappeared during the war. He was last seen in Sanctuary, running down the stairs when the antimatter bomb hit. True believers still think General Matheson is down here, waiting to come back and lead everyone into glory and power." He gave a low laugh. "The Iron Servant have looked, though, and they haven't seen a bit of him. I think he's dead. I think he's been dead, but some people will never believe that." I wondered if he was right when the ground started to shake. I thought it might be an earthquake, but Frankie's horror seemed to suggest much more than that. "The snakes," he whispered, his eyes haunted. Frankie began running down the tunnel. I stayed close on his heels as the reverberations increased in intensity and speed until I could barely keep my footing. The system of concrete tunnels and bunkers had been constructed well, and it didn't split apart or even crack. He took quick turns to the left and right, and I wondered if he was just choosing passages at random. After a couple of minutes, however, he turned to me, sweating heavily, his eyes wild and moving quickly to the left and right. The lights in the tunnel flashed a deep red glow that strobed on and off in time with the vibrations, giving everything a bloody hue and sending creeping shadows in every direction. "There are bunkers just up ahead. They go deeper down. It's our only chance. We have to outwit these things." As if on cue, I heard a wet, slithering sound just behind us. I turned my head quickly, seeing something incomprehensible in the red emergency lights of the tunnel. In the moment, I looked behind me. The tunnel must have been 9 or 10 feet tall, and the creature took up most of it. All I could see was its monstrous face. It had A giant mouth like a lamprey, filled with hundreds of fangs, spiraling around in a concentrated circle. Embedded in spongy black skin, the mouth never stopped moving. The teeth moved in and out as the flesh pulsated and quivered. Even after all these years, thinking of that mouth sends chills down my spine. I saw no sign of any nose or ears on the face of the creature. The skin of its body, a shiny silver color, constantly rippling as the sleek muscles of the snake worked feverishly beneath the surface. Its eyes met mine for a brief moment as its massive body slithered around the corner, dark, slitted pupils staring down at me with reptilian coldness. It quickly blinked, the eyelids closing in from the sides rather than top to bottom, the leathery membrane flicking closed and open in the space of a moment. Then it rolled its eyes up into its head, showing only whites and a bloody film at the bottom, and gave off an ear-splitting hiss. I turned back around, seeing I had fallen behind Frankie. He frantically sprinted ahead, the scars and fibrotic tissue on his body not slowing him at all. The tunnel shook all around us, and I nearly tripped from the constant vibrations. The creature stopped its hissing, cutting it off suddenly. It had sounded much closer, but I dared not turn my head again. I could feel the tunnel shaking faster and faster as the behemoth closed in on us, and the entire complex gave off eerie groans as countless more filled the other corridors. I was hyperventilating, and I knew I couldn't keep up this pace for much longer. I'd soon collapse or fall, and it would shred me apart in that strange alien mouth. No one back home would ever know what had happened to me. At the last moment, Frankie pointed to the left. With an athleticism I wouldn't have thought possible from his scarred body, he lunged through the door face first. Caught by surprise, I started to turn towards the door, but my right foot slipped. I felt it all happen in slow motion, my adrenaline spiking. I expected to feel those 100 teeth on me at any minute. Twisting my ankle, I pushed myself towards the door. A sharp pain ran up my right leg as my foot slid out from under me. At the same time, I jumped. As I flew through the air, I could see the snake, and I realized it was only inches behind me. It looked like a grotesque subway train about to run me down, its two white rolling eyes like headlights as it gnashed its teeth constantly. I went through the threshold, feeling the creature on my back right leg, the one that had betrayed me at the critical moment. I thought my entire foot had ripped off for a second. Then I landed on the concrete floor, simultaneously rolling and taking the brunt of the impact on my shoulder. As I looked back, my shoe was gone. I started laughing, thanking God it had only gotten my shoe. The massive, endless body of the creature kept moving past us, its reptilian muscles working furiously as it pushed itself towards us at breakneck speed. But we had escaped. Laughing and smiling, I jumped up, then winced when I landed on my right ankle. I looked down, seeing it was swollen, but not badly damaged. I likely wouldn't be doing any more running, however. Frankie smiled at me as he danced like a lunatic. "We're alive! Holy shit, we're alive!" I said. "I can't believe it." "You lost your shoe," he said, frowning, still breathing heavily. "Luckily, there's clothes and stuff in some of these tunnels. They were supposed to be for the people in the city in case the enemy used the H-bomb on us, but none of them ever got the chance. By the time the antimatter bomb had finished going off, the city got filled with things like that." He pointed at the snake, whose massive body still hadn't finished passing. I wondered just how massive it was. I shuddered slightly, thinking of hundreds of those things moving around the tunnels. "So, where do these bunkers lead?" I asked. He didn't meet my eye. "Horrible things lay at the bottom. I've never gone down to the deepest levels. It leads to the pit of skulls. No one who's ever gone down there has ever come back." "The pit of skulls?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Who makes these terms up?" "The Iron Servants used to go down there and try to clear things up after the bomb. Most of them died. Then the government started recruiting teenagers into the Iron Servants. Most of them died, but they did manage to explore the place first. They put it on the TV during the collapse, showing this is what the Kingdom of China has done to you and trying to rouse the population towards war. But the war was already over. We ended up giving them the H-bomb, and they gave us this. He motioned around the place. So, what happened to the ones who didn't die? They still around here? Frankie didn't look comfortable with the subject. Well, he said, looking like he wanted to try to find a way around the question. Then he sighed. I guess you could say they were changed. Changed? Like what? You mean like mentally? Like they had trauma? He laughed at that, doubling over. Mentally? Trauma? No, nothing like that. If it was something like that, who would care? Not me. We've all got trauma. He wiped a tear from his eye as he said it. No, they were affected by something dark. When they came back, some of them were partially skinned alive. You could see their skulls, and they were hungry, drinking blood constantly and ripping apart bodies with their teeth. They still had on the uniforms, most of them, but they weren't human anymore. Whatever they had seen in the pit of skulls, it made them demons. That's why no one goes down to the pit of skulls anymore. Well, that's not the only reason. There's more than that down there. This world sucks, I said, feeling homesick. Frankie nodded. Yeah, it does. He lowered his head sadly, his scarred, fibrotic shoulders slumping. But this is my home. This is all there is now. What if I could get you out of here? I asked. What if I could take you back to my world? He shook his head. No, I won't leave it behind. This is where my friends died, and my mother and father, I think they died here too. This is where I belong, and maybe when I die here, I'll see them all again. Maybe they'll be waiting on me on the other side, and they'll say, Frankie, we missed you. Welcome home. I could have left here 100 times, but this is what I know. Well, we better get moving. The tunnels outside still shook and vibrated with the passage of the snakes. Eerie echoes of clanking steel and shaking concrete ran through the complex. Okay, where to now? He pointed down the bunker. Red lights glowed on the steel walls about 10 feet apart. Metal benches had been fused together in the corner. I saw a dead black screen on the other side of the bunker, probably some TV screen. It had been built directly into the wall. Past the metal benches, a small slit appeared on the wall, no more than a couple of feet wide. I had to turn my body to get through it. I found myself in another bunker. This one had the same setup with metal benches and a dead TV, but these benches weren't empty. Through the red glare of the emergency lights, I saw 2 bodies sitting side by side. A young woman sat on the right, her body slumped over onto the lap of a man in a uniform. They looked like they had both shot themselves. Their bodies had started to mummify in the dry bunker air. In the man's hand, I saw a pistol still gripped tightly in his desiccated grip. Beneath the young woman's open, filmy eyes, I saw another pistol on the ground, one that she had likely dropped after the final moment. It took me by surprise for a long moment, but Frankie just shot them a quick glance and kept walking. Wait, they have guns? I said. Frankie looked back at me. Guns are dangerous. I don't use guns. I have no idea how you survived so long without a gun. He looked at me for a long moment, then pointed to the corpses. They got shoes, too. Why don't you see if they're your size? I limped over to the man's corpse, hesitating for a long moment. Then I pried his mummified hand open. It had a texture like leather. I could hear the bones cracking underneath as I move the fingers, a feeling of revulsion overtaking me. I yanked the gun out of his hand as a smell like cinnamon and rotten eggs emanated from the disturbed corpse. I cracked open the massive cylinder and noticed it still had 8 shots left. It was a beautiful revolver with a polished wooden handle and a silver etching carved on its side. I saw initials engraved onto the wood saying TH in calligraphy. Only 1 bullet was missing. I took Frankie's advice and compared the man's shoes to my own remaining shoe, putting them side by side. They were slightly bigger than I would have liked, but under the circumstances, I was grateful. I took the shoes off the corpse, switching my 1 remaining sneaker for the black leather pair the man had worn. I felt a sense of revulsion stealing from a corpse, but I knew I would need these things much more than he would, and the shoes ended up fitting surprisingly well. I gave Frankie a thumbs up. He smiled and looked warily at the gun. He seemed to have an innate fear of them. I moved through the slim door of the bunker, finding a corridor with ventilated metal flooring that I could look right through and into the seemingly endless abyss. At the end of the catwalk, a series of metal stairs spiraled down into the darkness. Frankie turned to me, a serious expression on his face. "Friend, I should tell you, I've never been to this part of the bunker before." I shrugged. "That's fine, as long as you know where we're going." He didn't meet my gaze. "You do know where we're going, right?" "Snakes won't stop going through the tunnels for days once they come up," he said, changing the subject, but not meeting my gaze. "So you do know where we're going?" I asked again. He shook his head quickly. I know the direction, but I've never been down here before. These tunnels have become strange over time. Sometimes it seems like new tunnels just appear off of ones I've passed 1,000 times. Other times they seem to move around and change places. The antimatter bomb has made everything in this world strange. These tunnels, they're part of that." "I trust you," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. He looked up and smiled, and anyways, I had no other choice. If Frankie couldn't find his way, I'd have absolutely no chance. We began climbing down the diamond-plated staircase. The stairs seemed to go on for eternity. I looked down, realizing I could see right through the vents in each step, and my stomach seemed to drop. I saw 1 red emergency light after another descending into the shaft, but no sign of a bottom. They seemed to just draw closer and closer together until they disappeared into the darkness. Frankie didn't know how far down the stairs went, and he seemed somewhat anxious as well. I tried talking to break the tension, but my voice echoed up and down through the shaft with every word, and I began to feel the noise might wake up something. I quickly stopped trying to make conversation. After what must have been an hour of descending, the air started to change all around us. It grew warmer, and a red glow began to emanate from far down below us. It looked like fire, giving off flickering hues of crimson and orange and yellow. Then Frankie gave a shout of triumph and pointed. A dozen stories below us, I saw a catwalk extending from the stairway, fused to the far wall. A dark doorway stood there, the only break visible in the endless metal wall. "You found a way out," I said excitingly. "Where does it lead?" He stopped celebrating suddenly and gave me a half smile. "Well, we'll see when we get there, won't we?" When we got there, we found a heavy bunker door. I turned the wheel, which looked like one from a submarine door. It silently slid open. Behind it, I saw white lights shining from the corridor. After being in the dark with only red emergency lights for so long, it felt like staring at the sun. I squinted, blinking fast, spots dancing across my eyes. They quickly adjusted to the fluorescent lights illuminating the hallway, though. Underneath those glaring lights, I saw dozens of bodies, a macabre show to welcome us to a new part of hell. They were mostly women and children, and they looked like they had tried to flee towards the door that we had come through. Their bodies all faced towards the door, some of them reaching out with their pale, bloody hands. Many had their throats ripped out, as if by packs of coyotes, while others had puddles of blood saturating the floor, a black cloud of flies zipping around the hallway, feasting on corpses. These bodies looked much fresher than the ones in the bunker. Frankie, I said, just ignore them. There's a lot more bodies here than that. Bodies won't hurt us. But what did this? Who did this? If you're lucky, you won't ever find out. As if in answer, the lights flickered, and a deep, distorted laugh began to echo from farther down the hallway. The lights came back on, and I saw dozens of men beginning to approach, turning the corner, walking calmly towards us. It looked like some of them had been skinned alive, at least from the neck up. Their skulls grinned at us, a mass of blood and gore. Their lidless eyes stared ahead without blinking, and a green light seemed to spiral out from their pupils. When the lights went out again, I could still see that sickly green light in the air, emanating from the eyes of each of the transformed men. Their uniforms reminded me of the uniforms of the SS, pure black jackets and pants with high polished leather boots and a leather visor cap. On their uniforms and caps, a symbol was engraved, over and over, like a backwards 7 with a line slashing diagonally through it. Many also had medals pinned to their chest, medals engraved with swords and hawks and ivy vines, all of it meaning nothing to me. Frankie had turned around so fast that he ran right into me, sending me sprawling. His panicked eyes rolled in his head, and with immense strength he set out one hand and picked me up as he ran past, putting me back on my feet. The suddenness of it nearly sent me falling again, but he pulled me by my hand as we started moving. My ankles gave out after waves of pain ran through them. The lights went out again, and we reached the door. Luckily, we'd left it open. As soon as we were back on the stairs, I flung the door closed and spun the wheel, locking the abominations inside with the bodies of their victims. A few seconds later, fists began to pound against the other side, rhythmically, smashing against the metal. Frankie turned to me and shook his head. The Iron Servants, the bodyguards of General Matheson, those are the transformed ones. I'm not even sure if there's any normal ones left. I haven't seen any sign of them in months. The surviving Iron Servants used to try to do patrols, as if they had some control over the city, but they gave that up quickly when most of them didn't return after the first night. So what now? I asked. We can't go back up, and the corridor's cut off by those things. Well, we have to go down. Let's hope there's another way out before we reach the pit at the bottom. Is there a way back through the pit of skulls? I asked. He nodded. It connects with everything. The pit has many trails that seem to glow overnight. I've woken up in my room and found doorways that have grown there while I was sleeping. But the pit of skulls is worse than any part of the city. I'd rather deal with the snakes than the creatures down in the pit. Have you ever been there? I asked. He hesitated for a long moment. I've looked in once. I never did it again. When I asked him why that was, he wouldn't answer. He just shook his head. With the conversation over, we began to descend, hoping to find some way out of here, but hope faded with every downward step we took. I kept looking down the shaft, expecting to see an end to the spiraling metal staircase. Seeing an endless drop into an abyss whose lights faded to a pinpoint made my stomach drop every time, especially as we could see straight through the ventilated steel of the stairs. How far down does this go? I asked Frankie, incredulously. I thought of diamond mines I had heard of that went down for miles, and I figured we must be getting close by now. The staircase had braces attached to the wall every 20 feet, an endless procession of beams that must have been instrumental in keeping them from collapsing under their own weight. I saw no more catwalks, no doors branching off the stairs. Finally, after traveling down another 20 minutes, I looked down and saw an end to the descent. I saw the hard, rocky ground of a cave floor far beneath me, illuminated with bright fluorescent lights. The beams shone upward through the shaft, clouds of dust and dirt moving upward in rhythmic waves through the arrows of white light. I saw a massive sign and benches. It looked like a subway station far below us, with shining steel trash cans and an empty reception desk. "What is this place?" I asked, but Frankie didn't seem to know. "I've never been down this far, but I've always found my way in the past. Don't worry, if anyone can find the way in the city, it's old Frankie," he exclaimed proudly. Above us, in gold-plated letters a foot tall, read, "Antonin Dellarhyde Transhumanist Center." Behind us, a huge black screen spanned the length of the wall, 20 feet wide and 10 feet tall. As soon as we stepped off the last of the stairs, the screen lit up. It looked like some sort of news broadcast, or maybe a historical documentary. Looking back at the stairs, I saw some tiny red lasers facing sideways on the last step, likely some sort of motion detection technology that controlled the TVs. In front of my eyes, in crisp HD definition, tens of thousands of men goose-stepped in formation in black uniforms. A tall man with cold blue eyes in a snow-white suit with a white visor cap and tall black leather boots stood above them, simultaneously saluting and surveying them as they walked past. His expression was grave and confident. His face looked like it had been carved from marble. His high cheekbones and strong chin reminded me somewhat of the statue of David done by Michelangelo. The democratic experiment started 50 years ago in Victoriat, a woman's voice read out as military processions continued to show on the screen. Fighter jets screeched above the city in tight formations, like eagles surveying their prey from far below. After that, it changed to an image of a cheering mob, tens of thousands of fanatical, glass-eyed people thronging around the man in white, stretching out their arms towards him and mobbing each other in the process. A line of soldiers in black uniforms held the crowd back from the stage, while General Matheson stood, alone and unsmiling. And what were the results? For our people, hyperinflation, starvation, and economic destruction. As long as we were democratic, the global elites and profiteers would pretend to come to our aid. Yet in reality, a plan devised long ago had begun, a plan to exterminate our people from the face of the earth by underhanded means, a global conspiracy to kill off the cultural creators and the great minds of Victoriat. As long as the enemy had political power, the ultimate death of our people would become a certainty. The screen abruptly shifted from its focus on the mob and military processions to show emaciated beggars in the streets, their sunken faces looking out at the cameras with hopeless expressions. They wore torn, dirty clothes. Some of them had bags wrapped around their feet instead of shoes. Among them I saw children, no older than 6 or 7, their filthy clothes and dirt-streaked faces staring towards the camera with hopeless eyes. Seeing the desperation of our dying people, our great leader, General Matheson, took upon himself the salvation of our nation. The national revolution had begun, and in time, the screen changed from the charismatic movements of the leader in white on a massive stage into a blur of static and color. The woman's voice became robotic and stretched out. In time. Then the screen went totally black. I had the feeling of eyes on my back. I turned to Frankie, who looked as white as a sheet. his eyes wide and horrified. But he wasn't looking at the TV. He looked behind us at the spiraling staircase, trembling and staring blankly around. Green light began to stream down the stairs, the same sickly green light that had been coming from the eyes of the soldiers, the ones whose faces had been ripped off in some grisly experiment that I couldn't imagine. I knew seeing the lights could mean anything, but very little of it was good. Then the TV came back on, starting over at the beginning of the same segment, the woman's voice sounding far too loud, blaring out her strange propaganda. The voice echoed eerily in the great silent chamber, waves of sound overlapping and fading, turning into a nearly incomprehensible mishmash of sound. "The democratic experiment," she parroted behind us as Frankie grabbed me by the arm and drew me forward. I felt like since I had first crashed the car, this city had been trying to kill me at every turn. I couldn't imagine how anyone could survive long in these conditions. My respect for Frankie grew immensely at that moment as I realized what he had dealt with for years, until the point that it became all that he knew. We ran into the Transhumanist Center. Everything looked sparkling new, the metal still shining in bright silver as the bright red and black walls looked undamaged. At every corner I saw the symbols that the soldiers had been wearing, the backward 7 with a line slashed diagonally through it. I looked back at the immense chamber with the stairway, seeing more of those faceless soldiers descending. Where they had come from, I didn't know. I felt we had securely locked the door to the hallway, but there may have been countless more on the surface, and roaming the tunnels and bunkers for all I knew. They walked silently in soldierly fashion, their backs straight and their heads held high, but the skin on their faces had also been peeled away. There were hundreds of them now, a column stretching upward on the spiral staircase, and their pressed dark suits like a line of black ants marching back to the colony. I turned away, horrified, a deep sense of dread filling every part of my mind. The green light that seeped through the columns made me feel sick and dizzy, and even looking at it for a few moments had felt like a physical weakness in some subtle way. The hallway had labeled rooms stretching off as far as the eye could see. Looked like an optical illusion, with the doors being perfectly symmetrical on both sides of the corridor. The rooms were labeled in a straightforward way, with the first on the right having a large black 1 painted over the bright red walls. A smell like medicine and chemicals seemed to saturate the air. As Frankie moved quickly away from the threat behind us, I tried to jog next to him, but my ankle still screamed with hot pain when I tried to move too fast. I knew I couldn't keep up with him in this state. "Frankie," I whispered furiously. He turned his head back to look at me. I pointed at my ankle and grimaced. "I can't keep running." "Then we better find a place to hide," he said, looking back. The first of the soldiers had reached the bottom of the stairwell. We were running out of time. I looked to my left and saw a random door with the numbers 372 painted over the top. I felt the cold metal of the handle as it turned and opened. Based on what I'd seen in this place, I expected a den of horrors beyond, perhaps dead soldiers or human experimentation victims, or maybe more faceless soldiers. With relief, I saw the entire room filled with laboratory equipment, totally empty of life. Everything still looked brand new, without any dust or grime covering the shining steel of the machinery. That same bright red paint covered the surface and the floor, ceiling and walls, everything. Frankie came quickly through behind me, quietly shutting the door. He looked for any sort of lock, but it had none. "Damn," I said, a rising sense of anxiety making me feel like a trapped animal. "No lock. Should we barricade the door?" But it was too late. I heard the rhythmic clicking of heels against the floor outside. I turned to hide, seeing Frankie was already gone, disappearing amongst the huge steel vats and chemical equipment. I frantically ran to the corner, looking for something to crawl under in case they came in. In my hurry, I knocked over a glass cylinder and in that moment, sealed our fate. I saw it falling in slow motion, and my adrenaline kicked in. My body couldn't move fast enough to catch it. My hand went out as if it had a mind of its own, trying to grab the cylinder in midair, but it slipped through my fingers. A moment later, it crashed loudly against the floor. I was breathing hard, staring in shock at the shards of glittering glass littering the floor. Even though this had happened a couple of years ago, the sense of shock and horror at seeing that cylinder fall still stays with me as one of the worst moments of my life. It would lead to a hellish experience, worse than anything I had yet encountered in the dead city. After a few seconds, I realized that the heels had stopped clicking outside. A few seconds later, the door flew open, and I felt in my heart that my life had come to an end. They saw me standing there in the middle of the room, like a deer in headlights. I turned to run. I started to scream. No, stay away from me. Don't you touch me. The faceless men grabbed at me, dozens of them streaming into the room, their skulls glistening under the bright fluorescent lights. After a moment, the sickening green light seemed to flow into the room with them, like thunder following lightning. Please, I said, struggling hard. Their iron grips had no yield, though, and they frog-marched me out, my arms pulled upward behind my back, forcing me into a bent position. Don't kill me. I'm not even from here. They said nothing, simply herding me into the hallway. A smell of ozone permeated the area around me, mixing with the odor of chemicals to form a truly foul scent. Standing before me, I saw General Matheson. I would have recognized him anywhere. He didn't look like the others, and they still clearly regarded him as their leader. As soon as I found myself in front of him, the soldiers released their hold on me. General Matheson's whole body gave off that sickly light, but his face was intact. His skin seemed to have changed, looking like white marble. Green light streamed from every inch of his body, but his cold blue eyes were the worst. The whites radiated it, and it seemed to stream forward from his pupils like rushing water. Just looking at him made me feel sick and weak, as if the lights were itself in some way poisonous. He still had on his pure white soldier's uniform, a black and white visor cap with the symbol of the backwards 7 with a line slashed through it. In his belt I saw a revolver, similar to the one that I now had hidden in my pants. The revolver. I'd nearly forgotten about it. During the terrifying ordeal and the escape of the city, it had completely slipped my mind. I looked back, expecting to see Frankie being marched out of the room behind me, but there were no signs of him. The last of the soldiers left the room and closed the door. They stood all around me, forming a circle, General Matheson and I occupying the center. Two very different men in the middle of countless faceless monsters. "What's your name, son?" General Matheson asked me politely, his face stoic and expressionless. "Jason," I said. "And do you know who I am?" he asked. I nodded, feeling unreal. The eyes of the soldiers bored into me, each waiting for a signal from their leader. "That's good," he said, looking away. He appeared totally comfortable, utterly at peace. He had the look of a true fanatic without morals or doubts, and even in this polite conversation, his face seemed to radiate that lunatic self-confidence. "Please, sir, I'm not from this world. I came here because I was kidnapped by some madman, some strange, mutated guy who brought me here. I don't belong here. I really don't." General Matheson stopped speaking for a long moment, the entire hallway plunging into silence. He contemplated his words carefully for a moment, and I could see the great statesman that he must have been before his conversion into whatever he was now. He certainly was not a regular human in his current state, no more than Forrest or the soldiers. "We don't always have a choice where we find ourselves. When I was Prime Minister, the leader of a superpower with the greatest military ever seen, I heard many of the same objections from others, such as when my hometown was carpet-bombed by the Kingdom of China and went to ruins. The survivors asked me why this had happened, why their little city had been chosen for such a horrifying scene. I knew it had been chosen because my friends and distant family lived there. But what could I say? Sometimes Providence puts us in horrible positions so we can grow, so we can harden ourselves and form an iron will. Then we can overcome all obstacles. The struggle itself creates greatness in men. Those who do not struggle in this world can never achieve anything great. This is an eternal law. All those who do not wish to fight forfeit their right to life. In this world, natural selection is the only truth. But I'll tell you truthful, when I used to sleep, I had constant nightmares of my hometown. I saw the burnt bodies of the children on the sidewalk, next to the collapsed and blackened ruins of apartment buildings. The children still sticking their arms out towards the sky as if hoping someone would pull them out of the fire. The odor of smoke and charred wood was so thick that I could smell it before I ever got close to that place, from a half a mile away from the car with the windows open. In my nightmares, I always found myself with the people I knew, the ones who had died and whose children had burnt alive. We were in the basement of some building, trying to keep the raging fires away, trying to duck down low to avoid the thick black clouds of smoke that billowed through. I remember choking, suffocating, falling over burnt bodies. Then I woke up. This went on day after day after day, and it reinforced the truth I had known all along, that there are no accidents in this world. I was being shown this so that I could further harden myself against the future deaths and destruction that would surely come. Providence brought you here to us, and Providence chose that city for destruction. Providence chose Rusty Township for the animator bomb as well. Everything happens for a reason, so that a new world can arise, like the phoenix from the ashes. I will always follow the will of Providence, even to the end of my life. He stopped, looking me up and down, then turned and began to walk away. The soldiers flowed around him as he moved through the crowd like a single mind, opening up a gap and then closing as soon as he had passed. As he reached the last of the soldiers, he turned. "Take him to the pit of skulls," he said, disappearing as the soldiers closed in around me, grabbing me. They marched me down the hall for what felt like hours. Even in that moment of desperation, knowing I would soon be dead or worse, I felt a sense of awe at what these people had accomplished. I'd never seen anything like this in the world. The single hallway stretched for miles and had thousands of rooms branching off on either side. My ankle still pained me, but every time I would slow, a soldier would silently push me forward. I fell twice, landing painfully on my hands and knees, but they would pull me back up and continue to march me forward. They never seemed to talk, though perhaps that was just an act. I didn't know whether they were capable of speech or whether they were simply mindless drones, following the will of General Matheson or whatever had possessed his body and mind. The hallway started to transform after a while, and I realized I could see the end of it. A deep, lava-filled crater bubbled far ahead of us. Beyond that, the walls and rooms disappeared into a rocky cave-like chamber. The orderly, symmetrical constructs of the hall ended in torn wood, shattered doors, and melted metal when it reached an end. That same sickly light flowed out through the cavern, much stronger and brighter as we continued forward. I saw stalagmites and stalactites through the light, like teeth in a rotten green mouth, a mouth that would soon swallow me whole. At the front of the transition from the hallway to the cavern stood General Matheson, grinning now. Soon as he saw me, he came forward. "Welcome to the Pit of Skulls. This is where the magic happens." He paused for a long moment, looking thoughtful. "Would you believe I used to be a transhumanist, thinking we could change ourselves into higher beings with genetic engineering and computer chips. He sighed at this, his grin fading. What a fool I was. The true transhumanist is here in this chamber with us, and it's far more monumental a discovery towards the evolution of humanity than any implanted microchip. He made a sweeping motion with his hand. Here we have the cure for death itself. This is where the new world will begin, and you will join me in the struggle. You will become one of my soldiers. With my mouth dry and my heart pounding, they pushed me forward into the pit of skulls, where my humanity would be drained from me, replaced with something unthinkable. Tears began to flow down my cheeks as I thought of my family back home, the thought of all things I wanted to do in my life. I felt in my heart that I would never escape this place. As we crossed the threshold from the hallway into the cave, I saw a mixture of strange architecture. There were patches of cave extending into the end of the hallway, and the remnants of twisted metal and small areas of bright red paint still stuck to the area of the cavern wall. It seemed like the cave had grown organically into the hall and fused with it. I had no idea how this could have happened, but I figured the antimatter bomb had changed this world so drastically that now even the Earth itself might act as an unnatural and bizarre thing. Most of the soldiers had scattered into various places when they entered the pit of skulls. Only 2 stood guarding me, one holding each arm and forcing me forward into the sick green light that emerged from the cave. It twisted my stomach and made my head pound. I felt my mouth go dry and my heart race. Goosebumps rose on my skin, and I felt myself beginning to tremble uncontrollably, my teeth chattering, my hands reminding me of the tremors of an earthquake. General Matheson had gone, receding deeper into the pit of skulls. I wondered if I would see him again. I knew that if I was transformed, he would likely be a god to me. I would become just another mindless soldier in his vast army of abominations. As we went deeper into the cave, I saw that the green light seemed to be emanating from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, and from the cave itself. They came in rhythmic waves, strengthening and fading, giving everything a diseased look. The fused, half-cavernous setting continued to spread before me as I saw barracks rooms and large halls. I looked over at the first one I passed and saw a massive mess hall. A murmuring cessation seemed to hiss from the mess hall, where hundreds of soldiers in black uniforms sat down to eat. I looked over for a moment as I was dragged past, my ankle shrieking in pain as the soldier kept pressing me on towards my doom. With horror, I saw that the faceless, transformed soldiers ate human body parts, raw and sliced up, each on a tin plate. I could see parts of legs and arms, faces and cheeks, tongues missing, and much more evidence of the brutal and sickening mass cannibalism. From behind a serving window, I saw a pig-like man in a large chef's apron, his face round and pink, his nose bovine. He snorted and spat constantly as he used a meat cleaver to slice up more bodies. I saw blood splattering the ceiling and walls behind him as the cleaver thwacked down, splitting bone and slicing through flesh like butter. I felt like I had entered the 9th circle of hell. How could anyone live in this place? Who would want to cling to life in such a destroyed world or in such a ruined city as this one? But even as I looked on in absolute terror, I noticed that they could talk. They all seemed to talk at the same time, murmuring in low voices, their skeletal mouths moving up and down, the muscles underneath flexing and contracting. But it didn't sound like words by the time it reached me. It was more like the hissing of snakes combined with the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the meat cleaver behind it all. I saw those strange half-pigmen all over the cavernous compound. Sometimes they were hauling loads of emaciated dead bodies, naked men and women and children whose faces were all twisted into ethereal expressions of terror and agony. I saw marks of torture on many of the bodies, deep gouges that cut to the bone and burn marks on their faces and eyes. They took the bodies towards the mess hall and the kitchen behind it, snorting and grunting as they passed. My faceless captors frog-marched me past the den of nightmares, twisting my arms painfully behind me, forcing me to lean forward and stride fast. I wondered if Frankie was still alive, whether he too would be taken here to see the true nature of the Pit of Skulls. Then the corridor opened into a massive chamber with stalagmites and stalactites 30 feet long appearing up and down, sharp as spikes and thin as pencils. The walls seemed to shiver and vibrate as curtains of green light passed through, emanating from the floor and ceiling, swirling and moving in cylindrical waves. I saw cages staked to the sides of the walls, cages filled with naked, starving people. Some of them cried and wailed when they saw me, holding out their thin skeletal arms, like a child asking for its mother. Many of the others moaned in their cages, their eyes rolling, the sores on their bodies often infected and leaking. Large areas of discolored purplish bruises shone on many of the victims, and I even saw leg bones and arm bones poking through the skin, compound fractures that had turned necrotic and infected. Thousands of human captives lived in this place, and the green light illuminated every one and shone light into the darkest corners. The smell of sickness and death was overwhelming, so thick I could taste it. Behind the screams and moans of the tortured souls imprisoned here, I heard a distinct electrical humming sound, as if I were standing under high-volume power lines. I could see it rattle my bones and vibrate my chest. It was a powerful feeling, and it grew stronger as I went deeper into the chamber, past the last of the cages. The smell of ozone as we got further in became overwhelming. Faint odors of sulfur and mold mixed with it. My senses began to feel overwhelmed, and I wasn't even at the worst of it yet. In the middle of the chamber, I saw stone tables covered with blood. Some of it had long ago dried and darkened, but much of it looked fresh and wet, bright red pools that dripped from the sacrificial spots. It reminded me of an Aztec sacrificial altar. General Matheson stood next to one of the tables, holding a serrated, wicked-looking knife. Its blade looks like it was made of obsidian, a thin black handle with a glossy sheen curved out of a bone handle carved into the shape of a skull. He grinned when he saw me, his white marble face pulsating with an aura of that same green light. It seemed to embrace him, surround him, emanate from every pore as I drew nearer. The two faceless soldiers strapped me down to the table, putting a leather belt around my arms and legs and a gag in my mouth. Then General Matheson began to slowly lower the blade towards my face. "This is gonna hurt a lot, but that's part of becoming. All great men have had great suffering. This is an eternal law." I closed my eyes tightly, waiting for the blade to make contact, to begin skinning me alive, to rip off my face, and to begin to transform me into a monstrous soldier who would eat raw human meat and carry out atrocities without a second thought or any sense of emotion. "What do you think you're doing?" a voice hissed from the edge of the chamber. My eyes flew open and my head turned. I saw Forrest standing there, his bleached white skin given a green hue by the unnatural light of the chamber. "What business is it of yours, High Priest Forrest?" General Matheson asked coldly. "I brought this one here to this world," he screamed, his voice sounding inhuman and amplified as if echoed throughout the vast catacombs. "This is my soul for the taking, not yours." General Matheson looked down at me, his eyes blazing with fury. "Is this true? Did this man bring you here?" he asked me. "He's no man," I whispered, still terrified, still expecting to be cut to pieces by that blade at any second. But yeah, he brought me here. That's true. He kidnapped me and I escaped him. I thought he planned to kill me. Regardless, this is my sector and it's staffed with my troops. I must demand you leave at once, Forrest. Do not make me angry. My troops will come at a moment's notice, and I will have you executed if you interfere. My business is state business, and I am the leader. My will, absolute. You've been swallowing your own bullshit for far too long. If you try to attack me, I will kill you and all your troops. I don't need to mutilate bodies to get my power, General Matheson. I'm not so weak as that. General Matheson's eyes widened in surprise at the insult. Gods, kill him! Kill him now! I want his head brought to me on a platter. Soldiers in black uniforms rushed in, their bloody skulls grinning under their visors. Many had guns, and others had flamethrowers and rocket launchers. They showed no fear, but instead ran straight at Forrest. I watched in surprise as Forrest calmly surveyed the dozens of men rushing in his direction, intending to kill him. He pulled out a black stone from his pocket. I recognized it immediately. It was the stone that he had used to suck the soul out of the mutated boy he had encountered in the city. The stone he had used to follow me here. He threw it in a bored, underhand way, not rushing or panicking, not showing a hint of emotion. He spoke a few guttural words in some strange language I had never heard before. As the stone flew across the cavern, it suddenly burst into a blinding white light. It almost hurt to look at, but I kept watching, mesmerized by the surreal scene taking place before me. The soldiers had begun firing their weapons, and bullets raked the walls and floor. General Matheson cursed and began running out of the chamber, towards a large metal door built into the wall at the far side. A rocket launcher went off, and an explosion of heat blossomed only 40 feet away. Yet I ignored the mayhem and watched Forrest, knowing I could do nothing to save myself if a stray bullet came in my direction anyway. The light began to expand from a pinpoint to a line about 10 feet away. Looked like a tropical sun shining through a rip in space that now appeared across the chamber. Strange tentacles reached out, groping blindly. They were a sickly dark shade of purple, with black razor-sharp spikes sticking out of the front, like the legs of a poisonous spider. The spikes clicked closed and open in fast rhythmic waves. The tentacles kept coming, 10 feet, then 20 feet. Then they were wrapping around the soldiers and squeezing hard. I saw the spikes bite into their skin and began to drain their blood from their bodies, probing and sucking as the soldiers' skeletal mouths opened in silent screams. Dozens of the tentacles flicked out, and soon Forrest stood alone amongst the alien appendages, reaching out from another dimension, looking at his handiwork and smiling. He seemed to have totally forgotten about me. More soldiers were streaming in by the second, firing guns and rockets and flinging grenades, but the tentacles would wrap around them and drain all the blood out of their bodies in a few seconds. The cacophony of explosions and heat and the lights made me flinch and turn away, and I trembled uncontrollably, feeling I would die at any second. I heard a soft whisper from right behind me. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Turning my head, I saw Frankie crouch there, holding a very sharp silver dagger. "We gotta get you out of here," he said, cutting at the leather bindings holding me to the table. "I know where we are now. The hallway that leads out of here is an intersection with Virden. I've never come down this far before, and now I think you know why." In a few seconds, he had freed me. I quickly jumped down from the table and followed him, looking back to see Forrest throwing another black ball into the air as hundreds of soldiers ran in from the mess hall and surrounding barrackses. Countless bodies littered the floor, and I saw at least 30 tentacles now reaching out, some of them stretching up into the ceiling or hundreds of feet down the hall. Shuddering, I followed Frankie. We passed room after room where half pigmen, sliced up bodies, hanging them from the ceiling like a hunter preparing a deer. I saw human skins lined up, discarded in the corner, flat and stacked one on top of another. I smelled roasting meat, and the delicious scent of herbs and spices floated out of the rooms. After running for 20 minutes without any trouble, I saw with fear that a group of the pigmen now moved down the hall, armed with tall axes and massive blood-stained meat cleavers. They snorted and began shouting when they saw me and Frankie. Frankie stopped, pulling out a silver dagger from inside his tattered clothes. He turned to me. "You ready to fight?" he said, a gleam in his eye. He gave me a grim smile, his scarred face twisting as the excitement of battle and the rising bloodlust took hold. I knew because I had the same rising feeling in my chest. "Stop!" the pigmen cried. "Surrender, or we'll slice you into pieces and feed you to the dogs." I reached for the revolver in my pocket, whipping it out. I knew I only had 8 bullets, and I counted the pigmen, a wave of adrenaline coursing through my body. Everything seemed to slow down, my reflexes quickening. In a moment, my mind told me there were 10. Well, that's no good, I thought to myself. I began firing, aiming for the head and heart. The pigmen rushed me, waving their weapons, a fanatical gleam in their small, squinting eyes. Their round faces were flushed and sweating, and even from here I could smell the body odor that surrounded them, like flies surrounding a carcass. The first one's head exploded in a mist of blood and bone splinters. He still ran for a few steps, his headless body following some random nerve impulse that still fired in his destroyed nervous system. Then his body collapsed, sliding forward, the meat cleaver sliding out of his opening hands. The second one I hit in the chest. He grabbed at his heart, his eyes widening as he fell to the side, tripping another one so he went sprawling, his large axe flying across the rocky floor. They kept coming and I kept shooting. I killed 7 and I wounded 1 who was dragging himself across the floor with a massive hole in his leg, a flood of blood coming out in time with his heartbeat. Then I heard the click of the empty chamber. The last 2 pigmen were now within a few feet of Frankie and me. With a roar, Frankie rushed forward. They swung their meat cleavers at his face and neck, but he ducked, slicing one across the abdomen. I saw his intestines and organs spill out in a waterfall of gore. In the same swiping move, Frankie raised the knife, expertly slicing the other across the neck. They both fell back, the latter choking on his own blood and writhing, kicking his feet and clenching his fist as he raised them in the air. "Come on," Frankie said, and we kept moving. The end of the hallway was in sight now, and I was grateful. "We gotta get out of the undergraves before the drums start." "What drums?" I asked, but he shook his head. "You're almost home, friend. The door to your world is right up ahead. Many others have come through there too. Most don't return, though. Most of them die, but I try to keep those that I can find. I try to help my friends." How did you even get to me?" I asked. "I hid, and they didn't find me. I crawled under some machines in the corner. They took you out. I waited, and then I saw that really white man creeping down the hall, and I followed. Something in me told me that he meant trouble. Then I snuck in and did what I had to." He shrugged as if it were no big deal that he had saved my life, or maybe even saved me from a fate worse than death. At the end of the hall, I saw a wooden door with a huge blue daisy printed on it. It stood before me, chipped and old, and I opened it, finding a huge stone stairway rising up. It seemed to go on forever. I turned and hugged Frankie. "Thank you. You didn't have to help me, and you still did. Why don't you come with me? You don't have to live in such a nightmarish place as this." Frankie shook his head. I belong here. Here's where my family lived and where they died." I turned and closed the door, ascending the stairs for hours before I came to a shed. I found myself locked in. I stood at the door knocking and yelling for hours before an old man came with a key and let me out. He didn't look surprised to see me or the endless stairs in his shed, but I think that's another story. I ended up finding myself over 1,000 miles away from where I first started on my way home from work. I had a tough time trying to explain to my family how I teleported that distance in a single night. I still have nightmares about that world, about that dead city. Sometimes I wonder if Forrest will come back for me. I can only hope he died in the battle with the undead soldiers. But late at night, when I'm falling asleep, I still see his face, and I wonder.